you were in Venezuela, a simple plastic truck taught you something profound about life.
Wow.
And maybe there's a segue to fatherhood there.
Certainly, if being a father means learning how to be a son, that was definitely a moment where I learned how to be a son, because this experience that you're referencing comes from a Christmas season that I spent in Venezuela. And there was a young boy that received this plastic truck that I thought, when I first saw it, was like the cheapest thing you could ever expect for Christmas. And how could you be happy about that? But weeks later, he was still playing with that truck. And I thought about, that truck would have been broken in my house the day of, and it would have been discarded because it really wasn't that great. So for me, that gave me a sense of gratitude and a sense of like a focus on something besides material things.
Wow. And yeah, that's powerful. I can imagine my brothers and I growing up probably would have used temporarily and then, like you said, kind of discarded it, or would have gotten broken.
Yeah.
So is there a message there in that for dads in that experience? And we don't have to get that micro, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious. What about the message for dads in that experience?
Yeah, when I look back on that now, right? I mean, I think I was 19 years old when that happened, and so that would be 40 plus years ago now since I had that experience. And but if I were to like replay that in my mind now as a father, as a dad, then I would think that the obligation is to teach your children that material things are not where we get our happiness and joy from, and that it's more powerful to commit acts of service than it is to receive gifts that are representative of rings and jewels, like Emerson said in his quote. And so, I think that would be the message that I would teach my children, and it is a message that I've taught my children over the years.
All right. And one of your macro goals is breathing life into your dreams, or I should put it this way. Perhaps one of the things you share in your legacy building coaching and events that you do with families and with companies is breathing life into your dreams. Tell me about how you help people and how you could help dads breathe life into their dreams.
Yeah, well, I think, this is a great question. And one of the thoughts that come to my mind is when I first, landed a business opportunity in the great country of Argentina. And it was about a 27 or 30-hour commute from my house to Buenos Aires. And I was so excited to land that transaction. And when I was on the flight home from it, I remember like the feeling of dread that came into my mind that said, well, how are you going to be able to do this and still take care of what you say you value most? And I've always valued most my wife and my children, and now, of course, my grandchildren. But the act of taking this job in Argentina meant that I would be away from my family on a regular basis, sleeping more nights in an airplane and in a hotel than I would be in my own bed in my own house. And so there was a bit of a battle. I wrote about this in my book, Leading with Your Legacy in Mind, in the preface. And there was a bit of a battle that was like coming into me. But what I ultimately realized was I needed to be both Andrew, the professional, and Andrew, the dad. And I needed to be able to be clear with my clients that there would be times when I wouldn't be able to come. And I also needed to figure out that balance with my children when there would be times when I would be away. But so I guess what I'm saying by that is I had this dream of running an international business and working around the world. And I figured out a way to breathe life into that. And so when I have clients, I figure out a way to help them see how they can have both. It's not a either or, it's a this and a that. And that requires me to make decisions that support the both.
Nice. And that kind of dovetails into another thing that really struck me, and that is you've written that maybe happiness, a quote, maybe happiness is not the goal. How many things do we pursue, as dads, as people, where we are pursuing happiness for ourselves? It kind of maybe like the Argentina thing in a small way.
Yeah.
What should dads aim for instead of happiness per se?
Yeah. So happiness is temporary. You could be really happy right in this moment and then find out that your refrigerator broke down and now you're not happy. And so it's happiness is a temporary thing. So I think what dads and husbands and, men should focus on is joy. And joy is more permanent, and we understand a difference that may seem like a nuance, but joy is more of a permanent feeling. And I notice that I do speak Spanish, and I notice in Spanish there's two ways to say I am. One is the verb estar, and one is the verb ser. And the verb estar is temporary. So when you talk about happiness in Spanish, it's temporary. They use the temporary form of to be. But in the verb joy, it's permanent, and they use that permanent form of to be. And that's probably where I started having this thought. And also I started having this thought because I watched my 7 children grow from a lump in their mother's belly to, 35-year-olds, 36-year-olds now that are running around the world and doing great things. But when they were babies, they would cry all the time. And when they would cry, I would think there was something wrong. And so I would do something to make them smile, and they would smile and giggle and be happy. And then 2 seconds later, they were crying again. And so it just reinforces the idea that happiness is temporary, and that if we search for happiness, we're always going to be disappointed because something will come along to make us unhappy. But I've been very joyful in the midst of some of the worst experiences in my life. And that joy has come from being a father, being a husband, being a man who looks for joy in his life.
Wow. Now, we do not yet have grandchildren, but why am I picturing you surrounded by 17 grandchildren and feeling joy at that very moment? When you're maybe not doing anything, you're just hanging out,
It's, I think it was Hans Cohort, a great psychologist. He said that every child deserves the face of an adult to light up when they enter the room. And I read that when I was a young father. And I do that with my children. I do that with my grandchildren. When usually the way that I put that joy on my face or that light on my face is just acknowledging them by using their name. When my son walks in the room, it's John, how are you? And it's like this great joy to see him, and that brings it up. And so when you get 17 grandchildren along with their, 12 parents, 2 of my children don't have children right now. So you got 10 parents, I guess, and 17 grandchildren. There's a lot of noise and there's a lot of joy, and it's great.
And so, Andrew, is there a lot of Andrew saying all their names? And do you ever for a moment forget one of their names? And what do you do then? Put your hand on their shoulder and say, tell me your name.
Yeah, I never forget the names of my grandchildren. And I think the reason is because I pray for them every day. I spend moments where I'm thinking about them specifically by name. And so when I see their faces, I'm happy to see them, and I know who they are because I've been thinking about them when I'm not with them. I know them individually.
Yeah, I've heard it said that the best word people love to hear is their own name. So what a great thing a dad can remember to do. Just add their name to the beginning of a sentence. So you've done so much, and I've seen some of the images of you coaching and consulting with groups on legacy building in companies, corporations, and groups large and small. You've learned a lot. And this is an unfair question, but maybe something that will lead us to something great here because of you. What ports over easiest and fastest and most obviously from your leadership and legacy work with corporations, for instance, into practical fatherhood advice?
Yeah. So a leader is a desired position, and we learn sometimes in our society today, who would want to be a leader based on the way they get treated? But there's still this natural tendency inside of us that our mothers didn't say to us when we left the house, now go out there and be a follower. They probably should have in some sense, because a good leader knows how to follow. But we were always told throughout our life, go out and be a great leader, go out and be a fantastic leader. And one of the things that we think that means is some level of importance. And so it means that me being a leader is getting you to do what I need you to do. But in reality, the purpose of a leader is to make things better for others. So when I'm a dad, I understand a bit about what it means to sacrifice for other people as a dad. I've put 9 pairs of braces on my 7 kids. I have a daughter that had a couple of divorces and has been married 3 times, and I put those 3 marriages in with the other 4 that haven't had that experience. And so 7 marriages, and I still have 2 children yet to be married. And that always came at my expense. That was always something that I had to pay for. But I did it gladly because that's why I became a dad. I became a dad to make things better for others. And so when I work in an organization, it's the same goal. It's a fatherly or a motherly goal to nurture that environment, to create the community or the sociality where we can be a family, where we can be friends, but where we can really focus on that L word, which is love. And it's kind of funny when I first introduced that in my corporate work, but because I love so much at home, I'm easily falling in love with the people that I work with too.
Awesome. I was struck by just how poignant, if I may say so, your tagline on LinkedIn is, "You built your business, now craft your family legacy with intention."
Yeah.
What does that mean for parents generally and dads specifically who may not own businesses but are starting a business or are, at least they're building a family?
Whenever the word legacy is discussed, it's natural for us to think about what we will leave behind, and specifically what money, what resources we will leave behind. And so we spend a lot of energy as people saving money, working with financial advisors, or protecting our assets, working with trusts and trust lawyers and trust attorneys and asset managers. And there's a third piece that is very important in that equation, and that piece is called heritage design. And it just turns out that we spend most of our energy working on accumulating assets and protecting them, but very little time in communicating what we value most to the generations that follow. And so what legacy means to me is ensuring that the values that I have are communicated in a way that the people that I love most can receive them, and then can make choices to receive them or not, to adapt and use them, or to make other choices. And that's fine. I recognize that every generation has that choice. But what happens is most generations never have the choice because those values aren't communicated. And so what I spend time thinking about is, what do I value most, and how will I communicate that to those that follow?
And you talk about a to-do list versus a to-be list. Putting that through a fatherhood filter, what's that look like for a dad?
Yeah. So to-dos are interesting. They are also temporary. So I think back to the 21-year-old Andrew, and the 21-year-old Andrew was looking for a wife. That was on my to-do list. And the 21-year-old Andrew wanted to be a good husband, but he was looking for a wife. And if the 59-year-old Andrew was looking for a wife, I'm thinking my wife would probably have something to say about that. She probably wouldn't be happy. And so the 23-year-old Andrew and the 23-year-old Stacy decided that they were going to have children. And so we brought children into the world, and that was on our to-do list. But if that was on our to-do list now, my wife would probably be, look, we got 7. I really can't have children anymore. We really have to think about a different way to express this. So the to-do is the action that I'm taking to make sure that what I want happens. So the goal won't happen without a to-do list. But then I want to work on being, and my to-be list is also so if one of my most carefully selected goals each year is to be a better husband and to be a better father. So much so that I'll interview my children and my wife and say, what can I do to be a better father? And that's pretty hard. When I ask that question, I sometimes get feedback that I don't want to hear. But a to-do list item would be, I want to take Stacy out to dinner tomorrow night. And so that will help me be a better father. But as soon as I take Stacy out to dinner, can I say now that I don't need to work on being a better husband? No, new items come on my to-be list or my to-do list to ensure that I am being the best father and husband that I can be. And so the value of fatherhood and husbandry or being a good wife is the to be. I'm constantly striving for that, but I will never reach it because no matter what I do, now there will be something I need to do more to continue with it. But when I do that, I'm not wiped out or stressed out. I get great reward for doing that, and I want to do it more and more again. It's not an empty feeling that comes from being a good dad or a good father or a husband. And that's the difference between a to-be list and a to-do list. To-do
Love
list
it. Love that.
is empty, and I've got to go and do something again.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I want to kind of pull one thing out from that and ask you to elaborate just for a sec. And that's the asking your children, and if I heard you right, your wife, what can I do to be a better husband and father? What's
Yeah.
that look like? And how often do you do it? And is there a 1, 2, 3 that they'll help us picture that as dads so that we can do that with our own families?
Yes. So the frequency depends upon what stages and ages your children are. So when I had young children at home, I had an interview like this every month with them. So I just picked the first Sunday of every month and I sat down with each of my children. I had an interview with them. And in that interview, I was asking them about how was their life going and what were they working on and what were their goals and what were their things that were, that were important to them. And then quarterly, probably I would ask them, hey, what can I do to be a better dad? We're talking about how you can be a better person and a better child. What can I do to be a better dad? Now that they're adults, I generally have those conversations at our annual family conference. And I meet with them and I talk to them about how I can be a better dad because I'm discovering that fathering or parenting a 2-year-old is very different than parenting a 30-year-old who has his own 2-year-old. And a lot of us that have older children, we don't know how to really be a dad or a parent of an adult child. We hang on to that corrective mode that we had when they were just babies, and we try to correct them or give them things that they really don't need now, and prevents them from really becoming great men and women. And so the frequency is dependent upon where the ages and stages of the children are and how close of a relationship too you could build with them. Because if you're not asking that question regularly, then your children are probably drifting from you, and you may not even notice that.
So we can 100% picture you posing that question to your 35-year-old, just as you would to your 7-year-old. And I'm guessing you might even do this with your grandchildren, or maybe you haven't gone to that degree yet.
Yeah, I'm learning how to be a granddad. Our oldest is 10, and so our oldest are 11. So we have two 11-year-olds. But I really feel like when I do some of the things that I did as a dad to my grandchildren, then I'm getting in the way of my children from being dads and mothers. And so I kind of let them do that and decide whether or not they want to do that. And I just keep my interactions with the parents. And even like my in-law children, I have a more difficult time having conversations like this. I still have it with them because they're important to me, but it's not as regular as it is with my birth children.
Okay. Let's just go out 50 plus years in the future. You're going to have a lot of, children, grandchildren around. What will they say are the 3 most important things that they recall and see in your legacy?
Wow. That's a fantastic question, and obviously something that I've thought a lot about. So the one thing that I would like my children and grandchildren to remember me is that I always was an optimist, that there was always a way to make things happen and to learn and grow from experiences rather than be discouraged and depressed by them. So I realize that some of us are optimists and some of us are pessimists, and I have pessimistic people in my family, children, siblings, sometimes my wife, and we're together though, I value that viewpoint. But for me, I see the world as a positive place and as a beautiful place. And so I want them to remember that I could see a horizon where the sun was shining all the time, even in the midst of the clouds and the storms that came upon our life. So that's one thing. I want them to remember that I am a man of science, that I live my life through scientific evidence, But more importantly than my being a man of science is that I'm a man of faith. And so I'm constantly turning from the scientific evidence deeper into my faith. And I want my children and my grandchildren to hold on to faith because it has enriched my life so much. And then as a third thing, I would like my children to understand what I call the laws of abundance, but very specifically the first law of abundance, which is there is more where that came from. And so I don't have to live in a scarcity mentality, but I can be living in there's more where this came from, and I can give it all away and more will come back to me.
Wow, love that. Love that. Is there something that stands out in your mind as something that you would hope could become part of your legacy?
So when I was a boy, I heard a quote. This quote has stuck with me my entire life. And that quote is, no success can compensate for failure in the home. And later I heard a follow-up quote that said, the greatest success that you will ever have will occur within the walls of your own home. And so I love to work. I love to do interviews like this. I love to engage in beautiful dialogue, but I love being a dad more than anything. And there was a time when I asked that question, and sometimes this brings a little bit of emotion to me, but I asked that question, what can I do to be a better dad? And my children said, you need to be here more. And it was a little bit bizarre to hear that because we lived in a very remote area. And so in order for me to apply my trade, I needed to be in other places. I needed to be away from the home. There was no way to make a living in the area that we lived in. And when I told them that, they looked right at me and said, Dad, we don't care about the money. We want you here. And they were fairly young. I think my oldest was 16 at that time. But to a T, every one of them told me that in that meeting. And it was right before Thanksgiving. I remember this happened to be an interview that I did at our annual family conference. And I went right back out on the road and went to work until the Christmas season. And when I was supposed to be home for a Christmas time event, I was late. My plane was delayed and I was a couple of days late, and I was late getting in. I was flying from internationally. And I got to the party that I was supposed to be at our church, and I saw my wife in line at the food. And when I thought I would surprise her, and so I snuck up on her. And when I got close enough, I heard her say, yeah, I know what it's like to be a single mom. Andrew's gone all the time. And then I looked around and I noticed that she was with all of the single mothers that were in the room. And it just was a stake to the heart. And that was just a few days before Christmas. I had a bunch of contracts that I was signing for the next year. And I called them up and I said, I can't come next year. I need to be here. I need to be with my family. And so I like to say in a very positive way that I squandered those opportunities so that I could be a dad, so that I wouldn't squander the experience of being a dad. And when I think of that now, they're all in different places. I have a daughter living in Argentina. I have a daughter that's away at college. I have children that live far away from my house and close to my house, and they're all gone. And I can do whatever I want now. I can work every day as hard as I want from early in the morning to early at night. And I can feel comfortable that I said no then because I was engaged in the greatest successes of my life, raising a family.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew Thorn. Wonderful.
It's been my pleasure to be with you. I love your mission, Patrick, and I want to help in any way that I can. So,
thank you so much. Yeah, very, very inspiring. It really hits home and powerful. Yeah, I'm trying to do as many dad interviews as I can, and even trying to the point of trying to get some other things going. Looking at doing. Do you have any, just off the top of your head, just given in your experience, any pointers that you might share with me as to how I can expand the message to more dads?
Yeah.
The message being that, camaraderie and all these things we learn from each other.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, that's the greatest question of all, right? Is that how do we multiply what we're doing and expand it into markets? And I have been a huge proponent over the last 25 years of a statement that I heard in a Broadway musical production called Title of the Show. And there's a song, and the lyric to the song is, I would rather be 9 people's favorite thing than 100 people's ninth favorite thing. And so
That's good.
I live my life in that way. There is an audience for this great work. And sadly, if we look back generations or years, decades, the way a father is portrayed on television, the way a father is portrayed in the media is as if we're some sort of dope or fool. And sadly, we don't know how to talk about being a dad because without like somebody feeling diminished. And I choose to just be bold in my representation of what's most important to me. And I find that works. And so I think like, I don't have the magic bullet for how do we expand this, but I know that if I were to have a copy of this interview, I would post it everywhere that I can post it so that other people could watch it and see this side of me. And my clients won't be surprised because this is a side of me that I talk about all the time. You've seen a video that I recently created that talks about being a dad at Disneyland that, was on the phone instead of paying attention to his daughter. And that's reality. I think the greatest message that we can give to our fellow dads is that you're going to fail. You don't have a playbook for this, and the failure is not a bad thing. It's a way of learning how to do it better. I was failing when my sons and daughters said, to be a better dad, you need to be here. And I didn't want to believe it from them. I didn't believe it from them until I heard it from their mother. And then I was like, oh, I got to work on this. This is something that was a failure. And I don't feel less than by sharing that. But I think our friends who are out there trying to figure out how to be a dad, and maybe even those that are thinking about, can I ever really be a dad? Can I accept this responsibility? They need to understand how much joy comes from. And I use the word joy on purpose because there's a lot of miserable moments when you're a dad too. They're real. That's really there. And there's times when you will feel like a total failure as a parent. And that's okay. That's part of the game. And that will teach you and that will help you grow and that will help you learn. But I'm not a big fan of the Duck Dynasty situation, but I am a big fan of the podcast because it was a father and sons that was doing this podcast. And soon I want to like launch my own with my sons and do a podcast. But I think that this is the kind of podcast that real men need to watch.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you. I'm going to take that to heart. And I find that personally inspiring as a dad to hear that and everything you've said about how to be a good dad. And what I get in between the lines is you can always start again. You can always start again.
Yeah, today is a new day. It's the best day to be a good dad is today. Because it's funny that kids forget the mean and awful stuff you did usually if you start again today and you try to be a good dad today. And so it's funny how that works.
Love it. Love this. A lot of beautiful concepts, and thanks for taking the time. Thank you, Andrew.
My pleasure. It was great being with you, Patrick.